Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey, lovely radicals. How nice to have you on board again. Feel welcome. How are things? Are you doing fine? Today I want to say thank you before anything else, and I want to say thank you to Heidi. Hey, Heidi, I'm going to go right out and say it. I think you are helping to change the world. And if you think this sounds kind of over the top, I think it seems worth a closer look, because what does it mean to change the world? I mean, change that lasts, change that is infectious and healing. I think that sort of change comes in little steps. We were all involuntarily marinating in the diet culture, quote unquote, can't be happy unless you look a certain way narrative for so long that it's simply not possible to just delete our own internal programming, install the new size acceptance software, and thanks, be done with it. Actually, that would be the most awesome thing to happen, but as far as reality goes, well, we have to make do with consciously making steps to dismantle the harmful stories about ourselves that are the result of a weight-obsessed and appearance-focused and comparison-driven society. So what we need is support, sane voices, inspiring role models, facts to disprove that your worth is hinged on looks or appearance or weight. We need the diffusion of those ideas that actually benefit people instead of harming them. So basically, we need more people who become aware of the harm that all those body shaming, diet talking, and appearance obsessed messages out there does to us. And for people to realize that as a logical result, there is a tragic increase in people who become more and more compulsive around food and exercise. And instead of finding health and happiness and weight loss that some health guru or diet company or diet coach tells them, so many people end up living like hostages to the labels they have let someone else put on them. In a time when food seems to have become the new religion that people give their power away to and fight wars over, mind you, then there's a huge need for voices that tell people to take their power back and start listening to what their own bodies actually tell them. So the more voices like those of my guests are heard, the more people might actually finally feel heard in their struggles. The more weight-inclusive messages we get to hear, the easier it will be to heal. So if you feel like starting your own blog, your own podcast, or write a book of the rabbit hole that being obsessed with thinness felt like for you, or if you support this show until you feel like jumping yourself, whatever you do, it is changing the world. Thank you for all of you who support this show on Patreon. And dear Heidi, your contribution to this podcast on my support platform, Patreon, is helping me to keep going, to keep producing, keep on keeping up with the costs and keeping me motivated as well. So your contribution is an important piece of the puzzle that makes it possible for other women to find our message, and your pledge is a way of letting me know that I'm not alone on this journey and that we can all achieve such great things when we're together, when we stop competing and comparing, but actually holding hands and moving forward together. Let's change the world, baby step by baby step. Thank you. If anyone feels like joining the loving crew of Patreons, please go have a look at my site on patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. As you probably know, for me, gaining weight means re-establishing my health, which suffered badly from all the overexercise and restriction and binging and worrying and stressing over food. And as I said many times before, that gaining weight part is still hard. And I fall back into some old behaviors all the time. But I realized that against all of what this society seems to be throwing at us in terms of weight messages, I'm going against the grain. And I know that a lot of women have to do the same thing to gain their health back. I see it as the path to freedom, and it is so hard to do because society tells me everything but that. And there are people that say that we're promoting obesity by, sharing that piece of important truth. But we all know what really causes the biggest weight gain problems. It's not talking about this stuff and having to gain weight by stepping over a lifetime of dieting or having an eating disorder or not having a period or over-exercising. What really causes the biggest weight gain problems is diets. So I ask the question, why are we recommending to people what we know will leave them with a body that will be fighting back against perceived starvation? With the experience of those typical deprivation-induced binge behaviors that those people will automatically blame themselves for, and with a body that adapts to restriction by slowing down the metabolism in order to make do with less fuel, what does this leave a person with? From my experience, I'd say either total obsession, which it was for me in order not to gain the weight back, heaven forbid. I made it my full-time, unpaid job to deprive and punish my body, which cost me my physical health, my mental health, many relationships, and certainly peace of mind and my joy of living. And I know, certainly not everybody ends up with an eating disorder, but as we see in statistics, it leaves 75% of women with disordered eating. And generally, what's true for all of us who have been focused on losing weight, those restrictive, rule-based diets are, after the initial high and some compliments from other weight-obsessed human beings, they're highly likely to make us become more and more self-critical, more and more obsessed about our looks, more self-conscious, and most often feeling like failures. And we know that feeling ashamed and feeling like a failure, in turn, leads to all sorts of addictive behaviors. For some, that might be food. For others, that might be jumping on the next and next and next diet bandwagon. For some, that might be compulsive exercise. For others, it might be any other behavioral or substance-related addiction, really. Certainly, there is no long-term health improvement in all of that. That's why I think it's obvious that we need to treat people differently. And by that, I mean that we need to listen to the individual's story. And if we take weight off the table, there is the possibility to find back to normalcy, to establish sustainable, health-promoting behaviors. So those with a background of restrictive, disordered eating and compulsive exercise, that might mean gaining weight. That might mean letting go of strict, rule-based eating, finding a way to move the body without the goal of weight loss driving the behavior, finding a way to eat again without fear, and learning to accept that the body will find the weight that is best for the individual person, the weight at which the body actually works best. And for others who have been discouraged by all of the diets that failed them, learning new behaviors might mean to find joy in eating, not out of frustration or rebound binging, but out of self-care and an interest to keep themselves feeling well. Maybe for them, incorporating some movement into their lives without feeling unwelcome or made fun of in some places, that might be the biggest step. Which again proves that we should stop shaming people for their bodies, whatever bodies they're in. We should stop commenting on bodies altogether. After all, they're just the vessels we came into this world in. The vessels that enable us to achieve great things in life, to laugh, to connect, to be of service, to sing, to move ideas, to be curious, to venture out and explore the world. It really makes me sad to see how we recommend to some people those behaviors that we recognize as highly disordered in other people. That can't be right. And talking about vessels, imagine you came to my house with your car, and all you would do is talk about your car. And we would spend all evening talking about what's shit about our cars, who has the fancier car, and that my neighbor drives a pitiful vehicle, and that the person in the movie certainly has a great car that we'd like to have. And that would be our evening, you know what I mean? And most likely our next evening, and the next after that. Sounds like a great evening, huh? Not. So why are we doing just that? When we sit down with people, all they do is talk about their vessels and about what's wrong with them, or how they are tuning them, and how they are starving them, and how good they are at starving them, or how bad they are at starving them. All of that diet talk. Because you know it, radicals. People out there diet talk and fat shame themselves and others at basically every social gathering. Don't you think that's a complete waste of time? Aren't we hungry for more soul nourishment, for more inspiring real connections to other people, more real talk about our lives, our struggles, our dreams, our passions, our fears and joys? Don't you think we have more interesting, more satisfying, maybe even more fun stuff to talk about than our bodies and what might be wrong with them? I do. Imagine yourself at, let's say, 80 and taking inventory of your life, reflecting on what happened. What do you want this life of yours to have been about? Your weight? Food rules? Your level of fitness? I don't think anyone would say yes to such a shitty deal. And I think we're privileged enough to take steps in a more inspiring, more fulfilling direction by investigating the wounded parts of ourselves, instead of disowning all of the negative parts of life and ourselves and projecting all of the pain and all of the anger and all of the sadness onto our bodies and keeping stuck in wanting to fix our psychological pain by fixing our appearance. So all of you lovely radicals who are on this journey, let me say it once again. You're a badass. This work is hard. And here's my way of making it a little easier for you. In today's episode of the Life Unrestricted podcast, I get to talk to Josée Sovinsky from Toronto, Canada. Josée is a registered dietitian with French-Canadian roots who, after facing and dealing with her own struggles with disordered eating during her degree, developed a passion to help those affected by eating disorders and mental illness. She now specializes in eating disorders, intuitive eating, community nutrition, and seniors health. She holds an honors bachelor in nutrition science from the University of Iowa, and she has educated herself on topics such as body acceptance, health at every size, and feminism, all topics that guide her work as a non-diet, weight-inclusive, body-positive dietitian whose dreams are similar to mine. We both want to see a world free of mental health stigma, free of body shaming, free of dieting and disordered eating, where people of all sizes deserve nourishment, well-being, and happiness. Might seem like a bit of utopia right now, but heck, I sure love to be investing in that dream. So here we go. Hi, Josée, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today.
Oh, me too. I was kind of expecting a French accent.
Yes, that's fair.
But there is none.
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in a very French part of Canada, but my parents were from a more Anglophone part of Canada. So I kind of grew up with both languages. So I was very lucky.
All right. I was really expecting someone, speaking English with a slight French accent, which some people find completely endearing. but I can't imitate it because I'm supposed to speak French in Switzerland as well. We had French for like 9 years because it's one of our languages. It's a bit ridiculous.
One of the many.
Yeah, we have such a small
languages.
country and 4 different languages, and English is not one of them.
I know. Yeah, that's so strange.
Yeah. I was just talking to a friend today and I told him I'm so nervous every time before I do a podcast because it is not my native language. And then there's always this inner gremlin going, one day you'll say something really stupid or something that pisses someone off really bad and, you know, without actually intending to. But so far, apparently I've been lucky, but I'm always a bit nervous. Yeah.
No, you always do a great job for sure.
Wow.
Oh, yes.
Thanks.
Yes. I think I've listened to like most of the episodes. So
wow. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's such a great podcast and always such wonderful people on the show. So
makes me really happy to hear that. Thank you. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, so, no, of course.
Let's get to know you. I mean, me and all the people listening were curious about you. So let's start at the root of all the issues this podcast is about. Do you have any memories of how it felt like to be in a body when you were a little girl still?
Yeah, so growing up, I am from a really, really small town in Canada, and where I grew up, there was a lot of snow. So it's almost like that typical Canadian stereotype, right, where we get lots of snow. And so I remember, you know, playing in the snow, getting wet, and making snow angels. I remember feeling, you know, when I was really small, feeling really joyful in my body. And yeah, you know, the body hatred and the insecurities definitely came later. But when I was a child, it was quite joyful to have a body, and it was interesting. And yeah.
That's a good word. It was interesting. I think I'm starting to remember or recover some of the old memories when I was carefree about my body, but there were none, I thought. But there were moments when you just mentioned the snow angels. I think I remember myself in the snow, you know, waving my hands up and down in the snow. And surely at that moment, I didn't feel self-conscious. So there's this playfulness and curious, what can I do with my body? You know, there's no hatred in that.
No. And I remember too, I have an older sister and we would put together like dances and songs that we would perform for family. And, you know, we weren't self-conscious at all. Like it was just so fun to do these things. And we would never second guess like, oh, well, people, you know, judge my body for moving or being a certain way. It was almost fun to have a body when we were kids, you know, before we got those messages of there's something wrong with our bodies. So yeah.
Do you feel that you got unconditional love from your parents? Did you feel loved?
Absolutely. I am very lucky. I'm from a very united, very loving family. And to this day, you know, we're very supportive of each other. And so growing up, you know, I don't think my parents ever made me feel like I was inadequate. In fact, my parents were, you know, my biggest cheerleaders. And so I'm very lucky in that sense. I mean, I did grow up in a family where there was some dieting happening. So I did get those messages in a way, but they were never directed at me specifically. You know, I don't think anyone ever told me that I needed to watch what I eat or I needed to change my body or have it be a certain way. So, you know, the messages I would get directly from my family members were always quite positive. It was more the, you know, the subtleties of when other family members were dieting and then you start questioning yourself, you know, is that something I should be doing too? You know, and that's where it kind of starts.
The reason why I ask this question is because I think that for many people, especially with eating disorders, deep down, it's about a lack of love or a lack of having felt accepted or really being welcomed as a kid or integrated and not judged. And that's just a theory, you know, the deep pain. I don't know who it was or what it was, but there was this thing going around where people said people that have eating disorders are vain. And that really pushed my buttons. And I said, they are much more in pain than they are vain. And I think this is spectacularly shallow to say that eating disorders are coming from a place of vanity, when in fact they come from a place of utter lack of self-worth and trying to fit in and trying to be loved and thinking that it's about the body. So that's why I asked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Eating disorders are so complex. You know, they have a lot of causes. And absolutely, I think when people don't feel accepted or they have never gotten a sense of attachment, or then that can definitely contribute. But yeah, no, I was quite lucky that, you know, in my family, that wasn't a problem. I have really, really, really wonderful parents, which I'm so grateful for.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. So what was it that made you go, oh, I gotta fix my body? I mean, I hear that there were certain seeds that were planted maybe when you saw people dieting, but it wasn't the imperative that you have to change something or you will lose the love of your parents or your mother. So when did it start for you?
I think for me, a lot of it started just when I was probably in high school or secondary school. I think I always felt very different from my peers. I was someone who I was a little bit of a nerd in a sense. I loved studying and I loved learning and I loved school. And, that's not cool when you're a teenager, So I think I developed a lot of insecurities when, in those years, trying to fit in, trying to be someone who was cool and accepted.
Yes.
And I think the insecurities about my body kind of happened or started happening at that time as well. It's hard when you're a teenager, your body changes, which can be a source of trauma for a lot of people. Your body changes, you don't know what's going on. And in the midst of that, you're trying to be accepted by your peers and you're trying to get through school because, your future is relying on your grades. And it's such a confusing period. I personally did not have a great experience in high school. I know some people say oh, those were the best years, but for me, not so much. Yeah, so I think that's where the body insecurities started. But at that point, I wasn't really acting on them. I grew up in a family where food was always portrayed in a pretty positive light. So even though I was getting some diet messages, it was always important for my parents to sit down and eat as a family. And it was a social thing. And so I don't think I connected the dots when I was in high school of using food to control my body or to change my body. I actually saw food in a pretty positive light, you can use food to do positive things. So that's actually one of the reasons that pushed me to want to become a dietitian. So I went on to university in a nutrition program in Ottawa, so the capital city here in Canada.
Such a beautiful place. I was there once. It's so beautiful. I totally fell in love with the city. I really did.
Yes, it's a gorgeous city, and being bilingual, so I'm someone who speaks both French and English, and Ottawa is very, very bilingual, and it's really interesting because the two languages kind of just mesh together, and things, I don't know, are very work smoothly in Ottawa in terms of languages, whereas in other places in the country, there's a bit of conflict there's a bit of language wars happening in Canada sometimes, but anyways, Ottawa is a gorgeous city. I did my degree there in nutrition. And, I'm sure my experience is not unique in that the more I learned about nutrition, the more I started questioning my own eating habits. And that's kind of when I started being a little bit more strict about, what I ate and how much I ate. And it's sad to say, but I really think that my degree was kind of what fueled my disordered eating, which I hear.
It seems to be that people either start studying nutrition because they already have disordered eating and are kind of going there hoping to find a silver bullet to finally get the weight under control or whatever. That's how they tell me it is. Or that people get kind of infected by all the worry and the comparison and all the talk about food. You must be pretty stable to not be affected by everybody talking about diets and weight and what food and superfoods and whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, you don't expect that to happen when you go into a nutrition program. You just think, oh, I'll learn about quote unquote healthy eating, and I'll learn how to be healthy and be happy, and not realizing that it's really easy when you have all of this information about nutrition to take things too far. And you can't really unlearn what you've learned, right? So it's hard then to eat and not think about the nutrition content of all of the foods that you're eating. And, oh, am I getting all the different food groups? And then you have all these food rules in your mind that it's really hard to ignore. And so at one point, I think I had the thought, oh, I'm going to be a dietitian. I need to practice what I preach, right? So I need to get my own eating habits under control. And I say that in quotes because who even knows what that means? But
I heard the quotes without you saying them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's when I started being much more restrictive. And I remember I started to use one of those like food tracking apps to try to count all my calories. And yes, so you know where this is going.
Yes. Hello, obsession. Hello, compulsion.
Exactly. And one of the things too, a lot of universities offer gym memberships, right? So when I was in university, I could go to the gym for free. So I started spending a lot of time at the gym as well. And then at first it's always this way, right? When anyone goes on a diet or a quote unquote lifestyle change, at first it feels really good, right? You feel like, oh, I'm finally getting things under control. I feel empowered. I feel great. Yeah. And it really gives you that high, right? Of like, wow, I'm doing so well. And then slowly, it led to a lot of really, really uncomfortable emotions in the sense that if I missed a workout, then I'd be ridden with guilt and shame. And why can't I get this right? And
why is this happening, do you think? Because I have the exact same thing. In the beginning, it felt great. It's like a drug. I imagine like the first few times do feel so great. And after that, you're basically chasing the dragon. And for me, exercise started out really great. And then it started to become really closely related to weight and weight management. And then it became an impulsion and more and more and more. And suddenly it felt crippling not to do what I had done yesterday. We raised the bar, and that gets to be the new standard. But it never felt as freeing and empowering again. It felt like having to tick a box to be allowed to feel good. Why is this happening?
You know what? That's a great question. One of the things that I noticed is when we do get into this pattern of exercising more and usually eating less and trying to get that number down, I think we can never achieve what we want to achieve because we can always do more, if that makes sense. We can always eat less. We can always exercise more. We can always get the number down even more. So I think, again, it's that external motivation as opposed to it coming from ourselves, come from the inside in a sense. When the benefits we're focusing on are really those numbers, instead of focusing on, how does this make me feel? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling energized? So yeah, I don't know why, and it's hard too, because we live in a culture that really promotes these behaviors too, right?
Yeah, on an hourly basis, yeah.
Exactly. Anywhere we look, whether it's social media or in the checkout at the grocery store, and there are magazines, and everywhere we look, we have these messages of, oh, those behaviors are actually good, and you need to keep doing them, no matter how detrimental it might actually be to your life.
I don't know, but it suddenly came to my mind as you were talking that, isn't it the same? I know from myself, when I felt worth less than other people and I started to be in radio and people started to know me, and then I got hired by the national radio station and I got known in the entire country. In all of those years, I still didn't feel, I was kind of chasing that carrot again, thinking that once people were kind of appreciating my work or knowing me, then that would somehow feel gratifying or fill that void that I had been feeling all my life. And the more famous I got, the less that void actually got filled because I was just playing a role. It was my job. I still didn't feel seen. And then I was talking to a lot of people who got lost in the world of finance. They were getting bonuses that, make your head spin. And they told me that suddenly that didn't feel like enough. Suddenly they compared themselves to people whose bonuses were yet higher, and they still didn't feel like that void was filled. When I, in the totally different financial position, would have said, "What? Are you kidding? With a bonus like that, you should be happy all the time." And everybody says the same thing. Some people think once they get famous, they will fill that happiness void. Other people think maybe if there's more money, then I would be happy. Maybe if I'm skinnier, then I'm happier. Maybe if I had a relationship, then I'm happier. And it's the same thing as you just described, and I was thinking about with exercise. When we think it's in the outside, then no amount of fame will ever fill it. No amount of money will ever fill it. No number on the scale will ever fill it. And no number on the fucking elliptical will ever fill it. Because it's not there. Recently I saw a YouTube video where Jim Carrey said, I wish everybody was famous as I am and as rich as I am for a day. Just so that they would all really feel that it's not there. Happiness is not that. It's not there. I was chasing that all the time, and it wasn't there. It was never enough, never famous enough, never rich enough. We really have to grow it on the inside. But society and capitalistic society tells us that it is in the money, it is in the body, it is in the exercise, it is, in the fame. But it really isn't. I saw it myself. It really isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely a culture of never enough, right? Or sometimes people call it like a culture of scarcity, right? Where we always feel like we need more, and that's how we're going to attain happiness. And it's just,
we have to one-up people. That's also scarcity mentality.
Absolutely.
I got to prove myself better than the other person because there's not enough for both of us.
Yes, and it's always that, that mentality of the grass is greener on the other side, right? We always think that people have it better than us. And I definitely think that although social media can be a very powerful and positive tool, it definitely gives us more opportunities to compare, right? And everyone puts their best selves forward on social media, right? No one is going around posting how they lost their job or how they, broke up from a really important relationship, or, everyone is always just sharing all the positives that happen to them in their lives. And so it's very easy to go on social media and think like, wow, everybody else has it together and here I am, with issues. But the reality is, we all struggle. And I think that social media in that sense can be very detrimental, right? And thinking that everyone else knows what the heck they're doing while we're, trying to figure out this life. But I think in the end, no one really knows what the hell they're doing.
No, that's what I'm starting to see, because I get feedback where I recognize that there are people out there that think that I have it all together because I'm putting out this podcast. And I'm like, I don't have anything together. I'm doubting myself all the time. I have a void inside me so much of the time. I am confused about stuff, and I'm afraid of stuff in life and intimacy and huge questions. I keep falling into this trap too when I see someone that I consider, I don't know, I just assume they're happy, they have it together, they must be happy and sexy and in a good mood all the time. And it's never true. I've started asking people because, our inner gremlin goes and tells us that, look over there, look, she's better than you or he's better than you. And look at that ass, look at that, wallet, look at that car, look at those clothes. And it's never true, but it's really easy to fall into that comparison trap and thinking, as you said, that we live in a society where people only show their polished side. That's really detrimental. because the polished side is not the true side.
Exactly. No, for sure. Yeah. And, one of my favorite quotes is comparison is the thief of joy. And I definitely believe that, when we look externally and we try to evaluate our worth based on how other people are doing in their lives, right? Then that can really be soul sucking, right? It can really take a lot of joy away from us. And it's a lot harder to celebrate our own victories when we look at others who maybe have gone a little bit further in theirs, so it's hard. You really can't compare paths, right? We're all going at our own speeds. And yeah.
I see what you mean, but the capitalistic society basically teaches us to compare.
Of course.
Because otherwise, why would we be motivated to buy the newest model of the iPhone? Or we don't need all that. But if they keep telling us, we think that surely I must also own this new car or this new gadget because otherwise I'll be left behind and people see that I can maybe not afford it. Or when in fact nothing happens, they just want to make money. And this gets so ingrained in us that we apply it for exercise, we apply it for food. There's always something better. We're never enough. You really said it beautifully. And the quote, I love the quote, and I've got another one for comparison.
Yes, go ahead.
It says people are in the bad habit of comparing their insides to other people's outsides.
Yes.
And that's really just exactly what's happening because we do not know how a person is feeling. All these YouTubers who present their best selves and their toned abs or whatever. And we think, oh, Lord, I wish I was her. You know what I mean? And so many people have come forth, luckily, and admitted how miserable they were, how obsessed, how compulsive their thinking was, how depressed they were. And there's a part of me every time that goes, oh, her as well? I would never have guessed. But it's true all the time. We fall into the trap of comparing two things that cannot be compared.
Absolutely. And that's true. Even the people who do manage to change their bodies or maintain a lower weight through food and exercise and all those things, most of them who do aren't living happy lives. They have to go to pretty extreme levels to be able to do that. And I think, you're an example of that, right? You've explained this many times that you are someone who has managed to suppress your weight, but it's taken a lot of life out of you in a sense.
Evermore. It doesn't ask your whole life of you right away because to that shitty deal, anyone would say, no, thanks. But it starts happening so slowly that, I'm not going for that coffee or I'll be later because I got to work out first or I'll skip that social gathering because there's cake or I'll not go to that retreat because they don't have a gym. Stuff like that. And evermore, the cell gets smaller and we are not really aware of how small it really gets and that it really does become a full-time job, especially in our brains. Because people do tell me as well that basically all they're thinking about is, what if I let go of the reins a little more? What happens to my weight? Shit, my pants are a little tight. Oh my God, maybe I've eaten too much yesterday. Oh, maybe I should go back to exercising more, but my period is still missing. What if have I done this wrong? Blah, blah, blah. And you're never present for really engaging with other people because you're somehow still holding on to worry thoughts all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's true. I recently realized that when I was thinking back to the moments where I was kind of in the midst of my disordered eating, how I was really unavailable for people, for connection. Even when I was with people, I wasn't present. And exactly what you said, because at the back of your mind, you're always thinking about your next workout or the next time that you'll eat. And it really takes up so much room in your life that there isn't a lot of room left for the other actually important things
the joy,
like connection. Yes.
The things we don't have to earn, which is life. So how did it look like for you, the worst times?
Yeah. So it was... How can I explain this? It was a time where, I did manage to change my body. I was, as most people do, getting a lot of comments, from other people about how great I looked and good for you. And wow, you're so inspirational and, getting all of those those comments. In a sense, I was living off of those comments because I didn't really have much else to hang on to because everything else felt so miserable. The having to be so careful about how I ate and making sure I got to the gym. And the other thing too is I always felt like I wasn't good enough in my disordered eating, if that makes sense, because
totally makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for mentioning it. Yes.
Yes, because, although I was restricting and I was denying myself certain foods, like I would often get to a point where like I couldn't do it anymore and I would give in and I would have the cake or have, whatever it is that tasted delicious. And so I always felt like I can't get a handle on this, even though, I was actually restricting quite a bit. So it was really confusing in my mind. And I think that's one of the reasons why I never thought like, oh, this is a bad thing. Or I think that's one of the reasons that for a long time, I didn't really realize that it was disordered because I was still eating those foods. And it's like, I think in my mind, that idea of like not sick enough.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, it was really taking over like, oh no, it's not, I'm not that bad. Like I still eat these foods, but then I would feel like so much guilt when I did eat those foods. So, yeah, so it's really hard to explain. Like my mind was really conflicted in a lot of ways. And I think as many people do, I think I managed to hide it pretty well. I don't think anyone was really suspecting that I was struggling that much. I remember when I started opening up about it more so on social media, and I still hadn't really talked about it with my parents. And at one point, I kind of brought it up, and my mom was like, yeah, we never really talked about that. We didn't even know that was happening for you. And I think one of the reasons is, I was a nutrition student. Of course, I was making changes in my diet, right? Of course, I was eating, quote unquote, all the good, healthy foods. So I think no one even had a second take and looked at me and thought, maybe this isn't good, So it was hard because I got all that external validation for what I was doing. And so it was really hard for me to even see that there was a problem for a while.
Yeah,
but it did
because we're terrified to lose all that. It becomes our social capital. And even the sheer thought of coming out and saying, hey, this costs me a lot to keep that weight under control, quote unquote, and really talking about it, that means like losing all of the things you were yearning for so badly, love me, love me, love me. And then all of a sudden you go like, guys, I'm really struggling. And probably if I just let myself be, I wouldn't look like that. And then you're kind of afraid that everybody would turn their back and just leave.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really becomes part of your identity as well. You become known as that person who exercises and that person who eats well, and people look up to you for that. And of course, because I was a nutrition student as well, like people would ask me questions and
your advice.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was hard for me to think like, okay, I don't think I actually was having that thought process. I think it was more subconscious. But, I think part of me felt like if I let that go, like, oh, would people still take me seriously? Would
All
people
will be
still
lost.
Exactly. Would I still have credibility in my role as a future dietitian, right? If I can't even get myself under control. It was quite a struggle. And I think it made it even worse because I was going to class and my teachers were basically validating my behaviors as well, in a sense, talking about the obesity epidemic and how we need to get everyone to lose weight and how weight loss is the solution for all our chronic illnesses, And so hearing all of those messages just really reinforced everything I was doing.
Gasoline to the fire. Totally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, these messages are coming from university professors, who have PhDs in nutrition. And so you really look up to them. And in my case, yes. And in my case, most of my professors were also dietitians. And of course, I was working towards becoming a dietitian. So they were really, role models for me. And I would really look up to them. And so yeah, thinking back on it, it was such a messed up situation that was really fueled by our culture in so many ways, as is the case for, I think, most people who go through episodes of disordered eating or eating disorders.
Yeah, and for some people, it never stops. So I'm glad that it obviously stopped for you. You know, you looked around and kind of changed course with your thoughts. But how did you do that? Did you reach some sort of rock bottom?
You know, I don't know that I ever reached a rock bottom. I think that I was really quite lucky in that sense. You know, my disordered eating never really turned into like a full-blown eating disorder. You know, I never had to be hospitalized or anything. Not that it takes away from the seriousness of the situation. You know, it was a really, really tough situation to go through. But it's actually really funny how it happened for me. So while I was going through all of this, I somehow also had an interest for eating disorders as a professional, you know, like a professional interest. Like I wanted to learn more about eating disorders and without ever thinking like, oh, I have an eating disorder, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started researching that. And at some point, it was Eating Disorder Awareness Week in the States. And every time they do the National Eating Disorder Awareness Campaign, they circulate a 3-minute screening tool that people can do to see if they're at risk of an eating disorder. And so I was really like, I was following all of these things on social media. So I opened it up and I'm like, oh, I'll take the screening, you know, not twice about it. Of course, my results came up and I was a high risk. And so at first I was in complete denial. I'm thinking, oh, no, this test is wrong. You know, they don't know what they're talking about. I'm just eating healthy. You know, I'm just taking care of myself.
Amazing our ability to be in denial and get stuck in denial.
Absolutely. Yeah. But in a way, you know, that was always at the back of my mind. Really? Am I at risk? You know, it got me thinking, if anything. And so I think slowly like that changed my mentality a little bit because I realized like, oh, maybe something is off. And since I was interested in eating disorders, I had stumbled upon some Facebook pages and things like that of people who worked with eating disorders. And so I started slowly getting more body positive, non-diet messages through those people. And it was really weird for me. Like, I don't think it really happened in one moment. It was really kind of a slow progression of like getting more and more of those messages that made me realize like, okay, I need to loosen up. You know, I need to be more kind with myself. I need to let go of this wanting all the control. And yeah, so that really allowed me to kind of discover those professionals that were promoting these more balanced messages. And then from a professional perspective too, that's when I got interested in that as well. So it was really strange for me because it's kind of like both my personal and professional journey kind of intermingled, and part of me was like recovering from my own stuff. And then the other part of me was wanting to learn more so I could help other people. And
it's always the same, right? We teach what we most need to learn.
Exactly. And so slowly through the process, I discovered health at every size. I discovered intuitive eating. I discovered feminism. Like that was something that was really eye-opening to me, like looking at how dieting is really product of the patriarchy and wanting to control women. And, you know, all of these things, like all of these messages started to come into my news feeds. And so, you know, in a sense, like social media for me really, really helped me because I don't know that I really had people in my life that got it in a sense. And it's really interesting because now that I'm really open about my struggles and, you know, now I'm a health at every size dietitian, like this is what I do, right, as a profession. So I talk about it a lot with people around me and more, you know, people are opening up to me about the struggles that they're facing. And that's when you really realize that, you know, no one is happy doing this. Everyone is struggling in this diet culture. Yeah. So it's been really like, my professional journey, in a sense, was very therapeutic for me and really helped me recover from my own issues. And I mean, I will always have things to work towards, you know, because we live in a diet culture, we always have to fight those messages. Even when we consider ourselves to be recovered, it's always a daily fight, you know, to not let those messages get to us. But I'm really happy to say that, you know, I am probably in the best place that I've been since those struggles. So,
Were you resistant to the idea of health at every size, or was it just you accepted it on a rational level? I find it hard to implement, like for myself, the real kindness towards myself, that's harder to do. But on a rational level, I totally get it. There's no doubt.
Of course. Yeah. I think at first it was really hard for me too, because I was still in school at the time. And so I was still getting all of these like anti-fat people messages, right? While also learning about health at every size and fat acceptance and all of these messages. So it was like very difficult for me to navigate. And I think for a long time, I was quite ambivalent in the sense that I kind of leaned on both sides, if that makes sense. Like I would change my opinion depending on the day and depending on what I was working on. So that was hard at first. And I remember the worst of it was probably going through my internship, because then I was working with other dietitians. And it's sad to say, but the majority of dietitians are still very weight focused, still very pro weight loss and, restrictions and cutting out certain foods. And so that was really tough for me, because a part of me was already embracing the health at every size, more positive approach. So when I went through my internship, I'll always remember specifically this rotation I did in diabetes. And honestly, I think diabetes is one of the worst areas in terms of weight bias, because
Totally.
Because, the Canadian Diabetes Association guidelines say, lose X weight to help your blood sugars. So that's part of the
As
guidelines.
if thin people couldn't have diabetes. This is
right?
so wrong.
I know. And so since that's part of the guidelines, like it really becomes part of the dietitian's messages.
Yeah.
But I remember I was still an intern, so I was helping out a little bit, but mostly shadowing at the time and just watching and observing what the dietitian, and there was a nurse as well, what they would do with clients. And so I remember at one point this client came in and told us about what she was eating. And of course, this was someone who was looking to lose weight. And this person was really restricting and had been restricting for a very long time, and the weight wasn't budging. And anyways, when the client left, one of the professionals, said, "There's no way that's what she's eating. She's lying to us."
Yes, they blame people for non-compliance.
Yes.
That's such a mean statement.
I know.
Yeah, like 95% are non-compliant. Come on. Yeah, there can be 1 in 10 that is non-compliant. Okay, but not 95%. How can we even make such a statement?
I know. I remember just being like shocked when the person said that, thinking like, is that really how we're approaching people? That our first instinct when people aren't losing weight is they're doing something wrong and they're lying, right? And so I remember that being kind of a big moment in my internship where I thought, okay, this isn't right. There has to be another way. I think that in a sense really pushed me more towards the health at every size approach. And it really made me think as well, like, if the client is lying to you, which, is a possibility, but if they are, I would say that's more a reflection of you than it is of them, right? Are you not allowing them to take up space and share their stories and be open and vulnerable, right?
Shaming them.
Exactly. So it is, I always think if you're open and if you're kind and compassionate and, people don't have a reason to lie to you, right? And so, so anyways, that really got me thinking and really pushed me to change my approach. And once I really embraced it, like I never looked back. It's one of those things that, for health at every size, or HAZE, sometimes people call it HAZE. Sometimes you hear people use the expression like, you've been hazed. Once you've been hazed,
I love it.
Then it's really, really hard to unsee that. It's really hard to go back to promoting weight loss and promoting this really detrimental approach. And so,
how did your personal life change after that? Like your approach to food, your approach to exercise, your approach to other people, relationships?
So again, it was a bit of a process, but I definitely feel like now I'm much more open for connection, available for connection with both my friends, my family, and the clients that I work with. Since I have my own shit under control, right? Then I'm much more available to be there for other people in their struggles. So that was really life-changing for me. And I was just with my therapist a few weeks ago, and I was telling her, I said, you know what? Like, I realized that I barely obsess about things anymore. Like, I'm able to just eat. And that was, that is revolutionary for me, because for the longest time, that was not even something I thought was ever possible. Right. And now it's just like, oh, what do I feel like eating? I'll eat this, and I'm able to do things much more intuitively.
Wow, sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And did you uncouple exercise from food? The idea of, having to earn or burn food?
Yeah. So that one, I think, was actually a bit harder for me. For a while I was going through my disordered eating phase, I was running, and running was like really big for me. I did, some organized races. Like, letting go of that was really difficult, because I was almost in a state where I had to do it all or nothing. Like, because I knew that if I went for one run, then I would want to go for another X amount of runs, right? So I really had to like step back from it completely and learn to feel good without exercise, in a sense, and then slowly reintroduce it in my life. And I mean, this is what worked for me. I'm not saying it's the right approach for everyone.
But it seems to be, it has to be like that, because if you talk about it like that, and I can feel my own resistance to this idea, and then I know that it's exactly there. It's always where the fear is. And for me, the fear is, why don't you just take a week, a month, whatever, off, and don't do anything, just to, get the idea out of your head that something bad is going to happen. But then what I'd have to do immediately is deal with my anxiety, deal with whatever stuff I was running away from, literally, dealing with my food anxiety, because I keep hearing on other podcasts, not Health at Every Size podcast, of course, but on other podcasts where people talk about, yes, I got my bulimia under control. Yes, I got my anorexia under control. I'm totally relaxed around food. I just have my self-care stuff. Like, I exercise every day and it just makes me feel good, and I have to do it every day. And that is like, I see the addiction transfer. Like, of course, I feel pretty relaxed around food at times, because I know I have my exercise. But that's the new thing. That's the new frontier. Because I'm still not really facing the fear, because I have exercise in its place, We somehow have to face a fear to really be free.
Yes.
Because once it's not restriction, then suddenly the exercise becomes big. Just as bulimics, if you kind of just tell them not to vomit anymore, then they are at risk of becoming anorexic. Just as anorexics, if you force them to eat without working on their deeper issues, they might start to vomit. So we always transfer stuff, and that's why I asked. It was really hard for me to uncouple exercise and food.
Yeah. In my case, I didn't run. I didn't go for any runs for like a very long time. Wow. And it was hard, because it's hard with exercise too, because you do get the endorphins, and so you get the physical response as well, right? It's both emotional and physical. So, but anyways, let go of that really helped me to take a step back and really evaluate, what role the running was actually playing in my life, and if it was actually something positive, and then address, all of the underlying issues and feel better about that. And, a few months ago, actually, I had this desire to just go for a run, and really from a perspective of like wanting to feel free and wanting to feel my body move. And I said, you know what, let's go for it and let's see what happens. Right. And I did go, and it was such a joyful experience. It was really strange that, something that was once really detrimental to my mental health, and that was really contributing to a lot of issues. And, I had injuries in my joints, and all sorts of things were happening from excessive exercise. So something that was at one point really detrimental for me actually was really positive in that moment. And, I really had an epiphany during that run of what actually is joyful movement. When we talk about intuitive movement and joyful movement, I was like, oh, this is it. I had that moment of like, this is what it feels like.
Because you were allowed to stop and go home and turn around at all times. It wasn't about, okay, you got to run at least X amount of minutes or at X amount of intensity. But it was just like, let's move. And if I'm done, I'm done.
Exactly. I didn't set a timer. I wasn't, tracking my kilometers or anything like that. I just ran, and I walked when I felt like I needed to, and I ran again when I felt like I wanted to. And it was just so freeing. But in any case, it's always such a process, and things get easier and easier as times go. And then sometimes they become harder again, and then they become easier, so it's...
Yeah, that's my experience as well. I was at a better point, and then I took a few steps back, and then I beat myself up over that. I'm like, you're such a fake, you're creating a podcast, and shame on you. And it was really hard to even think of self-compassion, because I thought I was under the obligation to be a leader at all times in this, because who am I to talk about stuff that I'm struggling with? But of course, that's what we all go through.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of power in acknowledging that this journey is a difficult one, and that there are challenges. And, I try to normalize my clients' struggles as much as I can, in saying that it's normal for there to be harder times and easier times. And I think we often make our situations worse when, we beat ourselves up when it's more difficult, right? We're just adding to that level of difficulty.
Totally.
So, I'm a big proponent for self-compassion. And I think my clients are probably like, oh my gosh, will she stop talking about self-compassion? But I think it's key in these journeys, when we're trying to recover from anything or improve our lives in any way, we have to approach it from a place of kindness towards ourselves, because there will be challenges, there will be hard times. And if we're in a place where we are at least trying to be a little bit nicer with ourselves, then it makes the process quite a bit easier. So
yeah, hearing you say it makes it sound so logical, but when you're stuck in your own head, then like self-compassion suddenly becomes the least thing you think about, and you're just in beat-up mode automatically.
I know, and that's why I was going to say, I realize that it's a lot easier said than done, right?
Yes.
And it's, we have to just keep trying and trying and trying, and eventually it becomes a little bit more automatic. And but it's difficult. Yeah. It's a very difficult process for sure.
And a lot of this work is basically internal work, and we're all facing that. And sometimes we're running from it, and sometimes we're able to face it more and work on it. But you can't work on it all the time, because it can be overwhelming, I think. And letting go of our own fears about weight, the letting go of the imperative to be thin, which is what keeps us so trapped, and letting go of all the rules that we created for ourselves. You talk a lot about courage in that sense, that we need courage to do that, which is logical, but how do we build it? What are your thoughts on building courage?
It's a process. For most people, it's not something that just happens overnight. Like we wake up one morning and like, I'm going to do this today.
Hey, I'm courageous.
Things that are definitely helpful is therapy, if that is something that is accessible to you. I have grown so much from therapy and from exploring myself, from really digging. I really feel like sometimes that's the only way to heal, is to really get a good grasp on what's happening.
Yeah, because we're really decoding. What's the message behind my rules? Why am I doing this? What is this serving? Why is exercise a crutch for me, or food, or dieting? Yeah, we need someone to work on that and decode why it is that we are doing stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that therapy has really helped me with as well is to be able to identify when things are becoming more difficult, or, when I don't like the word trigger, but, when there isn't something that makes us start to feel like we need to engage in those behaviors again. And then be able to apply some tools to try as much as we can to kind of steer away from that. So really that awareness piece, right? It has really helped me like tune into myself and really ask myself, like, how am I doing? And being really honest with myself and turning towards those different self-care tools or connecting with people or whatever feels good in that moment to try to change the mindset a little bit.
What's a self-care tool that you use often that has nothing to do with food and exercise?
I have a lot of different little hobbies. I'm one of those people who just jumps from one thing to the next and then I come back to something. So I really like knitting, for example. I've been trying to learn to play the piano for years now. I'm not very good at it, but I'm trying really hard.
Wow.
I like singing. I used to do musical theater back in the day. And so I love just turning music on and singing, and that feels really good to me. Sometimes it's just connecting with a friend that I haven't talked to in a while. I'm a social butterfly. I really need connection in my life to feel good. So sometimes it's just like reaching out to a friend. I have coloring books, so sometimes I'll color.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Yeah, I like reading a lot. So yeah, and these are just things that feel good for me, and everyone has things that feel good to them. But yeah, I try to turn to those things, that feel good. The other thing too is because I'm a dietitian and because this is my job essentially, right, is talking about health at every size and body positivity and all of those things. And then at the same time, I'm also personally always working on this. It can become really overwhelming because my whole life is just filled with it, right? So sometimes just like doing something else, doing something, like you said, that has nothing to do with food or exercise or even like body positivity or health at every size. So
Summer Innanen taught me that sometimes to get out of our body image struggles, we need to be able to leave the body positivity and body image bubble at times and just concentrate on something totally different. Maybe doing improv, or maybe, as you said, knitting, coloring, talking to people. Not being in it all the time, because then you kind of start chasing your own tail a little bit, I noticed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like for me, even going on social media is not an escape from that, because my news feed is just filled with all of these.
It's all about that.
Yes. And it's wonderful, right? It's wonderful because in a sense, it does give me those constant reminders that what I'm doing is a positive thing. And, it is a good reinforcement, but it doesn't allow me to escape that, right? And do something else. So it's learning those ways.
Because we shouldn't spend our time on social media either, just
of course,
because that's one thing that really gets me in this society, that people are just staring at their screen all the time. And there's nature out there, there are animals, there's sunshine, there are clouds, and we are completely missing the whole thing, and we're looking for connection through a screen.
Yes.
Which is absurd. So I'm really trying to limit that and taking the courage not to answer certain messages or emails or not right away, because I'm overwhelmed so quickly. And in the end, if I give in to all that, then I end up being either in front of my computer or my phone all day. And then this is not living.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes it is a very positive thing, but it can also give me an opportunity to compare and judge myself as well, right? Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
The community is so supportive. It's not a competitive movement at all, but from a personal perspective of being someone who's quite a perfectionist and all of those things like we were talking about, the not good enough piece that comes back sometimes, that's sometimes how I can interpret it, right? Without it being anyone's fault. This is really like a personal issue. But
that just reminds us to return to self-compassion, and wherever it would pop up anywhere.
Yes.
Whatever you do, it would pop up in those circles as well. That's why I think the best community to be in is actually the Health at Every Size community. I've never seen people that often don't really know each other from real life, how supportive they are, how openly issues are being discussed, how people are referring clients to, Health at Every Size specialists, how open the discussions are being led, how non-judgmental topics are being discussed. this is truly wonderful. And I feel my inner small girl sighing with relief. That's what we all need. And part of me was so longing for a community like that. And now the next goal would be to, have it in real life as well, which means we got to infect more people with a freedom virus of, hey, why don't we all just let go of this bullshit? Because it would be easier if the majority did it at the same time, like the Women's March. Like if we all do it together, the energy is so much, it's just easier to do than if we're all by ourselves and kind of all around us people are dieting. So I really love the community as well. And what are the usual reactions when you are working with people with eating disorders or disordered eating? And let's say you encourage your clients to be unapologetic about their size and share their stories. How do they usually react?
So it really depends, I would say, where people are in their journey. So people who are really still in the midst of their behaviors and of their disordered eating, that to them can be like an alien concept, where they're sometimes I get people look at me like, what are you talking about and who are you, And so, I think I'm very careful about how and mostly when I start talking about these things, because some people are just not ready to hear it, right? But at the same time, like recently I spoke with a group of people who had difficult relationships with food. So some of them had diagnosed eating disorders, some did not. I talked to them about the Health at Every Size movement and, how eating disorder treatment centers really need to stop focusing so much on the weight piece, and
don't get me started on that.
Yes. But, so I discussed these topics and I discussed, the principles of Health at Every Size and intuitive eating and what they meant and what they promoted. And people, they reacted really well. And they were like, wow, that makes so much sense.
Why don't you share those principles just for fun in case someone is listening who doesn't really know what it's about?
So Health at Every Size is really a movement that promotes well-being at any size. So it's the idea that you don't have to be a specific size to be well and to enjoy your life and to promote your health and well-being. It talks about like joyful movement, finding ways to move that actually feel good. It talks about life-enhancing nutrition, right? So how can we eat in a way that actually enhances our sense of well-being instead of keeping us in a sense of control and trying to change our body and all of those things. It celebrates people of every size and shape. And it's also, the movement is becoming more and more intersectional as well. So it's talking about not just size and weight, but also race and levels of disability and gender and all of those things as well. So it's really celebrating people of all identities, basically, which is so beautiful to me.
Yeah, to me too.
More of that. We need more of that.
Yes, we do. And it's really important for me also that the Health at Every Size, its basic message that reached me was, if I am stuck in my diet mentality and if I eat quote unquote healthy and exercise regularly with the idea of weight loss at the front of my mind all the time, then I'm much more at risk of giving all of that up when weight loss doesn't happen and you go, fuck it, I'm going to eat cake all the time and I'm not going to move ever again because this is crap, it's not working anyway. Then I get into the all or nothing mentality. But when I uncouple what I do from the goal of weight loss and focus on well-being, then I'm much more motivated to strive for a moderation sort of thing. Like, do I feel like moving? Yes, I do. And you don't have to do it because you have to burn calories, but you learn to take care of yourself and then you can eat healthy stuff and you can eat fun stuff. And it's not either or, like I'm only eating really healthy and kind of compulsively and then, or I binge.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it really helps to focus on my well-being no matter what size I currently am.
Exactly.
And then see what happens and not focus on the weight. And for most people, this turns out to have the most health enhancing consequences of all strategies.
Yes, absolutely. And not just from a mental health standpoint, but also from a physical standpoint.
Yes.
We do see that people who embrace intuitive eating and who follow more a health at every size approach tend to have better health indicators. And
Totally.
I would say it's a better approach, like all around.
Yes, and a sustainable one.
Yes, absolutely. It really does help people find that in between, right? That letting go of the all or nothing and really finding that gray area where they can live well and move and eat in a way that's health enhancing, but also in a way that they're enjoying their lives and that they feel happy and so it's really wonderful. And again, going back to those motivators, it really promotes finding internal motivators to do these things. Like you said, how does it feel when I do certain things? How does it affect my mood? Asking ourselves those questions instead of how will it impact specific numbers, So, and you're completely right. When we focus on internal motivators, then it's much, much more sustainable because it's coming from us, from the inside. It's not someone else telling us what to do. It's not the scale that's controlling what we do. Yeah, it's just overall much more positive.
But how maddening to realize that it's so easy to talk about this and it makes sense, period. But the behavior, like sometimes I feel my body being tired and I fight against myself somehow feeling guilty if I exercise, because then I do exercise against my body's signals. But if I don't do it, then I suffer because I feel guilty and something terrible is going to happen. So the implementation of it is really not as easy as it sounds, because a lot of people, their argument is you're all letting yourselves go. When in fact, it's everything but, because I realize it myself. It is easier to follow my rules and stay in my disordered place than healing, because healing brings up the stuff that I've been pushing away. And who likes that? So yeah, it's absurd sometimes for me to see that I totally understand it and still struggle with it.
No, absolutely. And that's the most difficult thing is we're still getting messages from both approaches, right? And so we can be in this situation where no matter what we do, we'll feel guilt because whether, we're not following the diet culture rules or we're not following the health at every size approach.
Yes, exactly. Then I feel like a failure no matter what I do.
Right. But, I think it's important to say that one of the major principles or ideas when it comes to the health at every size movement and intuitive eating and body positivity is, there is no right or wrong way. And it's all about, and I'm coming back to this because I love it, but it's all about the compassion piece. How can we learn to accept ourselves and forgive ourselves in those situations? Because you're right, if we do keep ourselves in a place of guilt no matter what we do, then we're not going to be able to move forward. And so that's why I talk so much about being kind to ourselves. And it is definitely very hard, right? And so at least raising our awareness of when we start being self-critical or having that negative self-talk, catching ourselves, at least in those moments, is the first step. And it's probably the most difficult one and the most powerful one in a sense, because when we raise our awareness of something, that's when we actually start having a choice.
I can identify the gremlin saying, go exercise, and the gremlin going, well, you didn't exercise. Haha, well, let's see how much you're going to eat tonight. As much as yesterday, I guess. So I see like, oh, hello, it's you again. Just as I talked about with Tom Rutledge, which was a brilliant conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, it really was. I'll never forget it. The way old Eddie is yelling in our ears, and that we can distance ourselves and say, okay, that's the gremlin voice. It's probably always going to be here, but okay, thanks for your input. It's not much different than yesterday, but thanks anyway. No.
Exactly.
And it's so hard because we have to stay vigilant for the shape it takes, because it can sound like a helper, it can sound kind, and it can sound bitchy, and it can sound mean, and it can sound ridiculing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But yeah,
we hear it.
when we're able to identify that voice, then at least we have choice, right?
Yes.
Because we're aware of what's happening. And so we can decide then to listen to it and follow whatever it's telling us to do or whatever, accept whatever it's saying. Or we can say, you know what? No, it's not helpful and that's not moving me in the direction that I want to move, right? And
yeah, it's like growing up. Like, okay, I gotta take this bicycle and try and stay upright and might fall left, might fall right, but I'm not getting off the bicycle.
Exactly. I keep trying. Yes.
Yeah, right.
I often say these are all psychological issues in a sense that these are our brain connections, that have been formed with so many years of dieting or diet culture or disordered eating and
reward and punishment.
Yeah, exactly. And when you realize that it took this many years to get to this mentality, you can't expect it to change overnight, right? And so it's acknowledging that, like, okay, it took me a long time to get here, so it will probably take a while to undo these messages as well, right? So, and again, that kindness piece, like we have to, when we can and when it's possible, to just say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay that these thoughts are coming back. It's okay that this is happening. I'm aware of it and it's okay. Trying to be neutral about it as much as we can.
As much as we can yeah.
Yes, that's an important part of it.
What I wanted to ask you about is that you have a strong interest in helping those who are affected by mental illness, which I am as well, because we all have some struggles with our psyche, I guess. For some it's depression, for some it's personality traits that cause us pain, for some it's trauma, for some it might be anxiety, high anxiety. And I think that eating disorders are a kind of anxiety disorder, which has probably even been proven. So you have a strong interest in mental illness and the stigma around it, mental health stigma. So tell me more about the connection between eating disorders and mental illness struggles.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that it's actually more rare to find a person who has an eating disorder that doesn't have another form of mental illness than it is to find someone who has both. So most people who struggle with an eating disorder have other mental health issues that they're struggling with.
Yeah, that's why the eating disorder develops, I would assume, because it's we try to self-medicate by dieting or over-exercising or eating, and we are masking the real pain.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's so important to recognize that eating disorders are a mental illness. They do have physical implications, obviously, but they are mental illness in the sense that you can't treat the physical issues without acknowledging the mental health issues. And that's something that, unfortunately, still at this point, a lot of treatment centers focus more on the quote-unquote weight restoration and
the meal plans.
And they fail to acknowledge the underlying issues. And I think often what happens is people go into treatment, they restore their weight, and that's another thing. Just the idea of weight restoration denies the idea that there are large people that have eating disorders as well, right? So even that is wrong in itself. But anyways, people go into treatment, they restore their weight, without having necessarily acknowledged the psychological implications of that, then they're put back into society where all of their triggers are, all of the diet culture messages are. And on top of that, they're in a larger body now than they hoped they would be. So no wonder people relapse.
Of course.
No wonder people have to keep going back to treatment because they never address the actual problem.
Exactly. And of course, there are so many people, as you described, that consider themselves not sick enough because their weight is in a quote-unquote normal range. They might be weight suppressing for years and suffering, but they don't consider themselves sick enough and they don't get treatment at all. If we focus on bringing someone back to a certain weight or down to a certain weight, then we leave out the majority of people, I believe, who are suffering from disordered eating.
And not just that, but, in Canada, we have socialized healthcare. So we have a lot of free healthcare, but most of the free eating disorder treatment programs, you have to have under a certain BMI to be accepted in the programs. Yeah. So that means that, if you're Yeah, I know. So that means if you're
Look,
a large
I'm not helping you with stage 1 cancer. Why don't we wait until you're stage
right,
4?
right, exactly, exactly. I know, I know it's quite horrible,
Yes, it
and not
is.
just that, but I live in Toronto, and in Toronto there are no publicly funded eating disorder programs that will take people with binge eating disorder.
What?
Which is just, it
There
makes me
is.
really angry.
Yeah.
So lots of work to be done. Even people who are able to access care, it's not ideal.
And how do you raise awareness for mental health stigma? How can I do this better?
I think there's a lot of power in sharing our own stories. I feel that one of the biggest ways that I raise awareness for mental health is by opening up about my own struggles and not being ashamed of them.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm very open with my friends, and that took a while. At first I was very ashamed of all these things, but now I'm in a place where I'm with a friend and I'll be like, oh yeah, by the way, I had disordered eating in university, and I try to talk about it in a way that isn't stigmatizing, right?
I do
I think
too, but I realize that some people are overwhelmed or they don't want to hear about it. They are overwhelmed with my honesty. Like people from my
yeah.
media days, they have suddenly disappeared, and that got me doubting again. There was this voice like, you're risking everything.
Right.
But at the same time, I've gained thousands of new people, and I've connected to people that I really, really feel a connection to, and not the superficial connection that I would have had. But it takes courage to start opening up. And once you do,
Absolutely.
people who can relate to you will come and look for you. They feel the miracle is in your mess. Like, okay, you're there. I'm not alone. And it is so worth it. It is worth it 1,000 times over. But it's hard to start.
Absolutely. And I would say, to the people listening who might have mental health struggles and who aren't in a place where they feel like they can open up about them, that's okay too, right? The first goal is always self-care and doing whatever feels right for us. But if we do get to a place where we feel like, you know what, I think I'm ready to talk about this, then I feel like it's really important that we do.
And in our circles, it's safe.
Yes, yes. And so, starting with the people that will love you unconditionally, right? Start with those people. And you don't have to open up to a point where people know everything about your struggles, but, sometimes just like talking about it casually, in a conversation, oh yeah, I struggled with this at one point and I'm better now, but it was really hard, just little things like that get people thinking, and sometimes people don't know what to say. They don't know how to react. And, we have to realize that that's just a product of our culture, right? We do live in a culture where mental health is still very stigmatized. And so we have to kind of almost expect those reactions. And so sometimes just saying like, it's okay, if you don't know what to say, I just wanted to share this information with you, makes people feel a little bit more comfortable.
And it helps to stop this diet camaraderie that is happening. It's hard to do when you've never done it, but for me, it's actually pretty gratifying to just interrupt and say, I'd appreciate if we could change the subject because I've been suffering with this for a very long time. And second of all, I find this conversation pretty boring because we're awesome women and we should be talking about changing the world and our powers and not about how we could compare our butts to each other,
Oh, absolutely. I think about that so often, that
if more women did that, then this camaraderie would stop. So we need more people who just make the ball stop at their feet.
Exactly. But I do think that there is a lot of power in just talking about it. It gets people more and more comfortable with the idea, and eventually, the stigma will at least be reduced. I don't know that we'll ever get rid of it completely, but if we can at least create a culture where people can open up about their struggles, often the issue is, let's say someone is struggling with depression, and on top of that, they feel like they can't talk about it because of the social stigma, then it just adds to their mental health struggles,
and
right?
The isolation that reinforces the depression.
Absolutely, totally. Absolutely. So I think, we would make the world a much better place for people who do have these struggles, for them to actually have the opportunity to move forward in their journeys, right? If we did get rid of that stigma around these issues.
Yeah, and if we keep having conversations like we do right now.
Absolutely.
I find it really, really wonderful. I want to thank you already, but I want to ask you your contact details because I'm sure by now everybody wants to check out your work.
Yeah, so the best way to find me is on my website. So it's just my full name, so Josée Sovinsky, and then nutrition.com. And from there, you can find my social media platforms. I do work virtually with people from across the country who need help with disordered eating. And I'm very happy to offer some pay what you can thoughts for people who can't afford these services because the treatment centers and everything, the care is so inadequate that I feel like I need to do something about it. So that's kind of my small way of trying to get people the care that they need. Yeah,
I hope you recognize how kind you are. Do you?
Well, I try. It's like we were talking about not enough, right?
That's why I'm asking, because I've been observing you and your online presence, and that's the number one energy I get is this is a kind... I trusted you before I talked to you. It's pretty... it's palpable. And I want to just tell you, in case your gremlin doesn't want to let you know, this is really kind.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Merritt. I'm smiling from ear to ear right now. You can't see me, but...
Mission accomplished.
Yes.
True.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And now I want to know what you would like to be remembered for.
Well, funny enough, I have been listening to your show, so I knew this question was coming, and I was,
damn it, I got to change it.
Yes. In preparation for a conversation today, I was like, what am I going to say? And funny enough, I had thought I want to be remembered for my kindness, and so apparently I'm doing something right, which just makes me feel really, really good. But so I want people to remember me as someone who was kind and compassionate and walked with people in their moments of struggle, who opened up that door and let them be themselves while they were suffering, because I think there aren't enough opportunities to do that in our society. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
This
Merritt.
conversation was awesome.
Yes, I had such a great time. And thank you so much for doing this show. I think it's so necessary for people to hear these messages. And so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.